Professor SUMIOKA's University Standard Philosophy course. Hi everyone!
Today we will consider the philosophy of the modern age.
Had we learned already it, hadn't we? According to it, humans have become aware of ourselves and have acquired knowledge from actual experiences through logical rationality.
That was just what couch philosophers said.
Would you say there is another philosophy of the modern age?
Exactly. Philosophy exists not only in the books, but also in the life. We may not realize it, but it forms our actual thoughts. Therefore today, let's look back at history, and uncover how it came to be. Indeed, the human ideals of modern Europe are sublime. Although they once lived under dogmatic Christianity, they newly advocated universal human rights, instead of God. However, they actually went on to dominate the entire world through imperialism, plunging it into division, oppression, hatred, and war.
Even now, Europeans may believe that they are the most developed and that other nations should follow them too. But Europe is actually declining with problems that they have made themselves.
To solve these problems, we should understand where their philosophy came from, and why their ideals and actions diverge. The problem might have been contained in the concepts of human liberty and freedom, from the beginning.
When humans who are not omniscient and omnipotent enjoy liberty and freedom, that naturally causes many problems. However, what is different between liberty and freedom?
Etymologically, liberty meant human, and freedom was derived from the same as friendship and fraternity. Namely, liberty is the social approval and treatment as the same humans, while freedom is a friendly feeling without restraint. Here we should remember that foreigners, pagans, and slaves were not humans but the same as wild beasts for many ancient nations.
They were the enemy, and no one hesitated to kill them. From the beginning, liberty is limited to their own community.
Children of the community inherited liberty, recognition as members. However, when ancient Rome expanded, and had to absorb foreign nations, it would give even them the liberty, citizenship of the Romans. If they paid taxes and military service to Rome, Rome gave them military protection and welfare of bread and circuses.
It seems to be a paid membership service.
However, the maintenance cost was over the contribution of the citizens, so Rome suffered financial difficulties. When the Germanics flooded in, the citizenship system collapsed, and the native Romans fled to the east, Byzantium.
After all, liberty can consist only within a narrow community.
The Germanics had respectively their independent tribal communities. However, when they fought the Islamic power beyond the Pyrenees, the top leader stood in with the Roman Catholic Church to be authorized as king. However, hating the ruling by the king, the other minor leaders of little tribes also donated their tribal lands to the church and built private monasteries there. Inheriting the position of the abbots, the families substantially owned the monastery manors. Thus, the free tribe communities became divided into the lords and commoners.
In the mass, feudal lords took the tribal lands for themselves.
Since the late Roman Empire, monasteries were small independent city-states, with enough land to support themselves. However, the monks were intellectual dilettantes from distinguished families, and never would work themselves, contrary to the slogan "Pray and Work." Instead, monasteries held many peasants, serfs. They rented land, and provided the harvest as well as other labor. The lords of the monasteries even had the jurisdiction, and imposed taxes at every opportunity.
Where was the equality under God? Why didn't they run away?
At the time, Europe was covered in dark forests and full of bandits. In addition, in the 9th century, Nordic Vikings began raiding. Monasteries also held armed knights, ministerials, and peasants needed their protection. Furthermore, there were many artisans like grooms, blacksmiths, and carpenters in them. Monasteries had watermills and other machines, so they produced not only bread, but also honey, wine, and beer. They sold those goods, and even ran hotels and hospitals. Although without liberty and freedom, they had the safety of belonging.
For everybody, life is more important than liberty.
The lords actively gathered people, and promoted the reclamation of forests. As well, bishops of the Catholic Church developed their old Roman cities. Thus, Europe became an intricate mosaic. However, the Crusades developed commerce widely, and merchants established cities at the transportation hubs. They organized associations, guilds, and practiced international trade and finance, with the armed crusade knight orders. Rejecting the interference of the neighboring bishops and lords, with the imperial permission, their cities got self-government as free cities.
Oh, eventually, freedom was achieved.
But it was just nominal. The distinguished merchant families like the Medicis and the Fuggers became the city nobles, and they ruled the commoners. Nevertheless, many serfs and artisans fled to the cities for freedom. Hiding themselves for over 1 year released them from the feudal bondage. However, even in free cities, they had no way to live but as the workers of the city nobles.
The brilliant artists of the Renaissance were also just patrons' dogs.
Once, feudal lords had the fighting power by mobilizing their ministerials and serfs. Therefore, despite the tense relationship, the kings and the lords cooperated. However, the failure of the crusades and epidemics of the plague led to the decline of religious rule and a shortage of serfs. Therefore, the lords had to gather their peasants with wages. On the other hand, instead of feudal lords, kings had to recruit bureaucrats such as Francis Bacon, and depend on foreign mercenaries.
Leading many fugitive serfs, the former ministerials would become the generals of free mercenaries.
Kings bestowed titles as lords on their favorite bureaucrats, but they had no actual control power over the territories. Although kings took only the big feudal lords in as vassals, others barely held their social position as gentries without office. On the other hand, some peasants earned money, bought their lands, and became independent yeomanries. Furthermore, by getting more land, and making other peasants cultivate it, they came up to gentries.
The fallen lords and the upstart serfs were now in the same class.
To increase their tax income, kings and nominal new lords conquered the cities of the church and city nobles by mercenaries. However, there was a growing number of the commoners in them. They were little merchants, craftsmen, pub managers, and the unidentified poor. Although liberated from the rule of the church and city nobles, they also did not welcome the king and the new lord.
They were originally those who fled from their feudal lords for freedom, so there was no way they would welcome the king and the new lord.
Northern Germany, southern France, and Flanders Netherlands were wealthy in sheep farming and wool handicrafts from before, and prospered respectively through trade with the Baltic, Levant, and North Sea. When the climate entered the Little Ice Age, in the 16th century, wool fabrics exports became valuable, even more. Several kings competed for these areas, but no one could get them, so city nobles and neighboring gentries of wool industries, contrarily could keep their autonomy, as Protestants of Lutheranism or Calvinism.
Those areas were rather niches of kings than free.
In particular, southern France was once a hotbed of heresy Cathars, in the 12th century, and after that, the territory of the Norman and Angevin Empire of the England side, that had caused the 100 Years' War. At the time, the Habsburgs of the Spanish-Austrian Empire were, on the Catholic side, preparing standing armies for the Reconquista, wealthy with gold and silver from the new continent. Therefore, involving the Habsburgs, the new lords began the French Huguenot War, and the Dutch 80 Years' War, against the Protestants.
Rich commoners annoyed poor new lords.
Already left the Catholic in 1534, England intervened in the wars, on the side of the Protestants, and the French Huguenot War was barely ended, by the Edict of Nantes in 1598, guaranteeing individual freedom of religion. Nevertheless, the Holy Roman Emperor forced all people to Catholicism again, leading to the International 30 Years' War.
He didn't understand how times had changed.
Meanwhile, taking advantage of these opportunities, the English gentries converted their farmland into sheep farming, and took up wool handcrafts in their villages. However, the government tried to cover the costs of the intervention in the wars on the continent, by raising taxes, causing the English Civil War. The gentry infantries with single-shot muskets and long spears, were superior to the royalist cavalries, which showed the end of lords and knights.
It naturally would anger the domestic gentries when the government charged the cost to help French and German ones on them.
International wars devastated land, and in addition, spread the plague again, so a large amount of the European population was lost, by the wars, starvation, and the plague. Furthermore, the Great Fire in 1666, destroyed almost all of London in England. On the other hand, in southern France, where the war had ended earlier, small business owners of Huguenots were experimenting with various new technologies, like mechanical clocks.
Mechanical clock was important for determining longitude to navigate the sea, right?
Yeah, overseas trades brought more wealth to Europe than taxation or war. Not only India and East Asia, the new continent and Africa also held great potential. Potato from the new continent saved devastated farmland and supported the food of the poor. Following this, tomato and chili peppers changed the taste of the Europeans drastically. As well, intensive tribal conflicts in Africa marketed large numbers of black slaves as inexhaustible consumables at low prices, which supplied labor power enough to realize new businesses in the new continent, like mining, sugar, tobacco, and cotton.
But in England, with the burned city and the obsolete king, no way.
The Sun King of France, Louis XIV, grew unusual plants in his garden, enjoyed sumptuous cuisine endlessly, and imposed his manners on his new lords, at magnificent Versailles under construction. Meanwhile, the Royal Society of England, a private association of scientists, such as Wren and Newton, led the reconstruction of London, with private funding of the provincial gentries. Leaving their manor houses in the countryside, gentries moved to cities, and were called bourgeoisie.
The Great Fire of London also brought a new wind in England.
However, Louis XIV suddenly revoked the Edict of Nantes, and forced Catholicism in 1685, so the Huguenots fled to England, the Netherlands, and Switzerland, with their funds and technologies. In contrast, having finished the New London, the gentries of England overthrew the absolute king, and invited the moderate one from the Netherlands, in the Glorious Revolution in 1688.
As the Sun King, he was very self-centered.
World information and technologies collected by the Royal Society, the rent income of the gentries by the New London, and cooperation with the Netherlands, raised the project boom in England. The immigrant Huguenots also founded the England Bank, with their funds in 1694, and it inflated credit. Loaned by it, and expanding the cotton trade, the East India Company distributed dividends of 500%. Besides, various joint stock companies were created, to develop overseas and new inventions, and gathered large sums of money. Even Swiss banks and others also pooled funds, to invest in English companies.
Louis XIV had handed over the keys for modernity to England.
Important was that, of whomever new lords, gentries, the Dutch, the Huguenots, and even other foreigners, money was money, and the dividends were equal. The nationalities of the company's managers were also not questioned. A free economy gave everyone liberty, the right to buy tickets for the future. However, wars had a major impact on the economy, as ever. The complex intermarriage among royal families led to wars of succession in the Netherlands, Rhine, Spain, and northern Italy. To select which projects to invest in, gentries flocked to coffee houses, read newspapers, joined masonries, and frequently exchanged information.
Truly, knowledge was power.
Among them, the South Sea Company of England and the Mississippi Company of France were risky. They were based on the black slave trading, to be planned to seize from Spain. It was a large-scale development that, if successful, could bring enormous wealth, but without any substance yet. Nonetheless, the stocks of both companies rose tenfold.
That was purely speculation.
Yeah, both companies went bankrupt in 1720, causing many gentries to lose their fortunes. However, the East India Company of England was going well. It imported Indian cotton fabrics as a cheaper substitute for linen. Gentries saved money with cotton for curtains, tablecloths, and even maids' dresses. However, cotton fabrics are highly absorbent, and delicate floral patterns were popular, so even ladies began to wear cotton dresses instead of wool and silk. The woolen merchants banned their import, but diplomats and officers in India brought them back, and on the contrary, cotton dresses even attracted ladies in palaces as valuables.
There was historical irony. People want things hard to get.
Therefore, importing cotton balls from the new continent, some merchants began to imitate Indian cotton fabrics, with original pattern printing. In addition, instead of linen, the navy of every state also used plain cotton fabrics for canvas, and repurposed them as a cheap material for workwear. Thus, the demand for cotton fabrics soared, and all states competed for cotton balls, from the new continent and northern Africa.
In this way, everyone from royal families to low workers wore the clothes of the same cotton.
In England, Liverpool in the northwest was the port to the new continent. Some investing gentries in cities returned to their home areas, Manchester, Lancashire, and West and South Yorkshire, connecting with the port by water, and took up the cotton industry themselves. Although it was yet just a jumble of individual entrepreneurs, ignoring patents and using K's steel loom and flying shuttle, they dramatically increased productivity. Angered K went to France, and popularized his inventions in Normandy.
It was yet a time when inventors were not rewarded.
A poor worker in the Lancashire cotton industry, Hargreaves, invented the spinning jenny, producing 8 threads simultaneously, and became independent as a thread supplier. But attacked by spinning workers about to lose jobs, and copied his machine by the other thread suppliers, he had to move south to Nottingham in 1768. His friend Arkwright, a wig maker, also went with him, and built a little auto-spinning factory, in Cromford, 20 kilometers northwest of Nottingham in 1771. His machine by the watermill, made cotton balls into fibers, furthermore into threads, without skilled workers.
That was the dawn of the Industrial Revolution and capitalism.
The succession wars were repeated, in Poland and Austria. They also caused conflicts in the new continent, such as King George's War. The 7 Years' War over Silesia between Prussia and Austria, was accompanied by the French and Indian War over Appalachia, between the English East Coast colonials, and the French Midwest ones, in the new continent.
The 18th century was a time of constant war.
The military load and the financial cost, ruined each country's society and economy. No countries had a standing army, besides the new Lord Generals, so each time they raked up the soldiers, from the thugs and the peasants, or depended on the free generals, holding the mercenaries.
Could they fight wars with soldiers like that?
Without being given any military training, but to attack an enemy position, the soldiers had to maneuver through cannon fire at 100 meters, exchange single-shot musket fire at 50 meters, and then charge. This method of fighting required them to march keeping formation, to the beat of the drums without fear. Therefore, the generals used strong alcohol and harsh punishment, to make their soldiers act like sheep.
But before the charge, many would fall from artillery and gunfire.
Then, the soldier in the back row moved forward, and the marching had to continue. Even otherwise, many soldiers died of illness, during the campaign of bad conditions. However, to the generals, casualties were merely a matter of probability. Soldiers were the expendables, easily replaced as well as black slaves.
They were treated less than sheep. Who would want to be such soldiers?
Wars destroyed land, and requisitioned even the savings of the peasants. They had no way but to be soldiers, to sell their lives. The families left behind, flocked to the cities, and had to become low workers, prostitutes, and bads.
I've heard London in the 18th century was full of gin drunks.
The Puritans who arrived first on the new continent in the 17th century, were actually a jumble of radical religious sects, against not only the Catholics but also the lukewarm England Church, and newly risen parties by revelation, such as the Quakers, followed them. In addition, exiled by the new lords and the England Church, former Catholic feudal lords, the Jacobites, went to the new continent, to get their new territories. Furthermore, in the 18th century, gentries and peasants, who lost their land and properties to the wars and money economy, also fled from various countries.
It was like the trash can of Europe.
Although they did not get along well, the new continent was fortunately so wide, that they could live apart, besides the Indian issue. However, from the mid-18th century, the new continent separated into the Spanish, French, and English areas, and the military costs, to maintain these areas against Indians and the other nations, increased. Therefore, their motherlands asked for the loads. Then, they got angered.
I also understand the motherlands. They were just free riders, rather than freedom wanters.
Their argument was that, if charged taxes, let them put in politics. However, they were from the beginning, political black sheep of their motherlands. For the moment, some English gathered at the Philadelphia Continental Congress in 1774. However, it was suspicious that, they truly represented their states. The Jacobite lords, the official reclaim corps, and exporting farmers with their black slaves, rather supported the English motherland. Nevertheless, the Congress had begun the war. That made a mosaic conflict all over the colonies.
It was the Civil War, where the next towners shoot each other.
Washington was elected the chief commander of the Continental Army, but such a colonial army did not exist yet. On the other hand, although England sent the new Lord Generals, they were odd with the Jacobite lords in the new continent. In addition, England had to hire even many poor German peasant mercenaries, who could not speak English, from Count of Hesse, to make up for the shortage of soldiers. Hating the English colonials, the Spanish and French colonials and even the native Indians, took the England side. Conversely, their motherlands Spain and France, supported the English colonials, to try to exile England from the new continent. But Masonic new lords and intellectuals rushed to the scene, as volunteers of the English colonials, from all countries of Europe.
Too intricate. Anyway, both sides were jumbles without command, so neither would have been able to give proper battle.
The French Revolution was much worse. The government's finances were critical, due to extravagance beyond measure and many international wars. Everyone understood the need to cut costs and increase taxation, but no one would accept that. Instead, they criticized each other's waste, between peasants and local gentries, the city commoners and bourgeois, new lords and the church, and even among the royal families.
Nobody wants to change their life, but to free ride on others.
The oversupport for the American Revolutionary War proved fatal. In response to the government's tax proposal, the people argued that only the Estates General had the right to decide on taxes. It was convened at Versailles in 1789, but they could not agree, even on how to proceed with the discussions. The government would send the army to the rioters in Paris, but the soldiers, who were behind on their pay, did not follow orders. Thus, the invalids' guns were seized, the new lords were either killed or fled, and the king was taken hostage.
There was a collapse of the social order.
The confusion continued. They had brought down the government, and issued the Declaration of Human Rights, which advocated liberty, equality, and private property, but they had no plan to do next. Some advocated a constitutional monarchy like Britain, while others called for the revolutionary Duke of Orleans to become the new king, a presidential system like the United States, a republic of bourgeois, communism by the commoners, or even anarchism without government. In addition, foreign countries also intervened, to maintain the absolute monarchy.
The masses are numerous, but disunited.
Exactly. They got the human right to decide for themselves, however as a result, they might be equal, but they became unable to cooperate with others, created chaos for themselves, and lost their freedom and fraternity. Contrary to Hegel's thought, they shared no common ideology, but just a common enemy. So, after they defeated the Ancien regime, the only solution was Robespierre's reign of terror in 1793–94. Before, the French king's army was made up of Swiss mercenaries. Meanwhile, bourgeoisies formed vigilantes, to maintain public safety in each city. When the revolution happened, the latter were turned into the National Guards, and defeated the king's army. Robespierre prohibited black slavery in the new continent, while he implemented universal conscription, increased the National Guards to over 800,000, and used them as his pawns to massacre his opponents.
Conscription made all nation his slaves.
However, they had no loyalty to Robespierre. In 1794, the Thermidorians took control of them, and executed Robespierre. However, the radical bourgeoisie and restaurational royalists were dissatisfied with the moderate Thermidorians. Therefore, the Thermidorians drew only the soldiers who pledged allegiance to them, from the National Guards, and created another National Convention army. When the Royalists broke out riots in 1795, young Napoleon led the new National Convention army, and quelled them, by firing scatter cannon in the center of Paris.
A determined officer of the moderates was contradictive. He would defeat them someday.
After that, he toured the expedition of Italy, and even went to Egypt, but the expansion of the Revolutionary Wars made the politics more unstable. Thus, Napoleon became the consul, through the coup d'état supported by the bourgeoisie, in 1799. Therefore, he at first reinstated black slavery in the new continent, for the interests of the bourgeoisie, and conquered them again.
He simply represented rather the interests of revolution, than the ideal of it.
Napoleon also reorganized the army, as 6 independent comprehensive corps, with tens of thousands of soldiers. They acted respectively as an army, and the revolutionary France could respond in all directions simultaneously. On the other hand, the US of the new continent, prepared for the coming war against Napoleon, and made inventor Whitney develop a new standard of muskets. It would be produced with the guides of mechanical jigs, so even unskilled workers should be able to make them, In addition, all parts are uniform and interchangeable, so soldiers should be able to repair them easily on the field.
Armies and weapons became standardized and interchangeable.
When Napoleon became the emperor, and conquered Germany, following the suggestion of Fichte and Humboldt, Prussia introduced compulsory education, in 1807. That was not welfare for the nation, but in fact, the preparation before conscription for the coming war against Napoleon II. Contrary to Fichte's speech, the Germans had so many regional characteristics and diverse ethnicities, that their language, customs, and culture should be unified first, by elemental education and nationalism, to make them obedient standard sheep soldiers.
Eventually, even people were transformed into uniform-compatible parts.
Nevertheless, they live respectively in different worlds with different histories, full of ignorance and misunderstanding. Thus, the equal but disagreeing faceless people, the masses, had been made. Whoever they are, bourgeoisie or the commoners, a complex between the feeling of omnipotence of human rights, and the one of the inferiorities of obscureness, tortures them with discontent and complaint, and drives them to compare and compete with others, although they are actually ruled just by probabilities. Therefore, they cannot be responsible, want to free ride others, and always seek some common enemy, for temporary solidarity. It was the real philosophy or lifestyle of the modern age. However, after that, it developed modern industrialization and the world economy, with the contradiction between human ideals and exploitation.
Is this the true colors of modern liberty and freedom?